So for all three of you, I mean, one of the great and memorable scenes in the film, there are many, but the iconic coffee shop meeting that people were so struck by when the film came out, seeing.
30 years. That's how long Heat has been sitting in front of audiences, and most people still haven't seen it. Not really. They've watched it. They've quoted it. They've called it one of the greatest crime films ever made. They've argued about it at dinner tables and in comment sections and across decades of film school lectures. But watching a film and truly seeing it are two entirely different things. And Heat was built specifically to reward the people who look closer. Because here's what Michael Mann did that almost no director has done before or since. He constructed a film where the most important information is never spoken aloud.
Michael Mann's Miami Vice was all the rage a few decades back. There have been no shortage of successful movies in the years since.
It lives in a hand that won't stop moving, in a cup of coffee, positioned slightly differently between cuts, in the way two men lean toward each other at exactly the same angle without any rehearsal, because they've spent months becoming the people they're playing, and it's just started to show. The cast of Heat has spent the years since 1995 slowly letting pieces of this story out. In DVD commentaries, in interviews, in Blu-ray extras, in conversations with cinematographers and tactical advisors and production designers who worked in Mann's orbit. And when you gather all of it together, the film you thought you knew transforms into something else entirely. These are the things the cast and crew eventually revealed. The things most fans miss the first time, the second time, and every time after that. Stay with us, because by the end of this, you won't be able to watch Heat the same way again. The Invisible Addiction, Al Pacino's secret backstory. Let's start with the detail that changes everything about Al Pacino's performance, and it never appears anywhere in the final film. Early drafts of Heat explicitly described Detective Vincent Hanna as having a cocaine habit, a powder backstory, written directly into the screenplay by Michael Mann, establishing from the opening pages that this was not simply an intense man.
Hello, I'm Michael Mann, and I'm going to talk about some of my films.
This was a chemically compromised man who happened to be the best detective in Los Angeles. When Mann trimmed the script for the final production, the explicit drug references were cut. The scenes were removed. The dialogue was gone. But Pacino kept playing it. Watch Hanna in any scene. Not for his words, not for his confrontations, but for his body. His breathing is rapid and inconsistent, not the controlled breathing of a man in command of a situation, the shallow, irregular rhythm of someone whose nervous system is permanently agitated. His hands never stop. Fingertips drumming on tabletops during interrogations, knuckles flexing during conversations where there's no logical reason for physical tension. Watch him specifically during scenes where he should, by any rational measure, be calm. He never is. Mann confirmed in DVD commentary that the powder backstory informed everything about Hanna's construction, from the insomnia referenced in his dialogue, to his 3 failed marriages, to the way he treats every relationship in his life as a temporary inconvenience until the next case arrives to fill the void. The addiction explains the marriages. The marriages explain the self-loathing. The self-loathing explains why a man this talented has to chase criminals at 2 a.m. to feel anything at all. None of this is stated. All of it is performed. Pacino discussed building this character around internal instability in multiple interviews after the film's release. He described Hanna not as a man who chooses to be chaotic, but as a man whose chemistry makes stillness impossible. The hunt isn't a preference. It's the only medication that works. Now go back and watch the interrogation scenes. Watch his hands. Watch what his fingers are doing during the moments when his face is composed and his voice is controlled. The performance underneath the performance is happening in his extremities, in the parts of the body that are hardest to consciously control. This is why Heat rewards rewatches in a way that virtually no other crime film does. On first viewing, Pacino's Hanna reads as operatically intense, the kind of performance that gets impressionists rich and audiences entertained. On second viewing, once you know what you're actually looking at, he becomes something much darker. A brilliant, damaged man running at chemical speeds no one around him can match. And the tragedy of it is that no one in the film ever names it directly. They just keep getting out of his way. Here's a question worth sitting with. How many other details in this film are hidden in exactly the same place, written into the character's history, and never spoken aloud, only performed? Because the answer, as we're about to show you, is almost everything. The coffee that actually happened. The real history behind Heat. Before we go any further into the filmmaking, we need to talk about where Heat actually comes from. Because this is a film that feels mythological. Two titans on opposite sides of a moral line, built for cinema, engineered for legend. And the truth is simultaneously more mundane and more extraordinary than the myth. In the 1960s, a Chicago detective named Chuck Adamson spent years tracking a professional thief named Neil McCauley. Not the fictional McCauley of the film, the real one. A career criminal who operated at a level of tactical sophistication that made him genuinely difficult to catch and genuinely dangerous to anyone who tried. Adamson tracked him, closed in on him, and during that investigation did something that has almost no precedent in documented law enforcement history. He sat down with him for coffee. Two men on opposite sides of a legal and moral divide, in a booth in a Chicago diner, drinking coffee and talking honestly about what they were doing to each other and why. Adamson later described it as one of the strangest professional experiences of his career. A conversation where both men understood completely that one of them would eventually be responsible for trying to kill the other, and both men were entirely comfortable acknowledging it across a table with cups in their hands. Adamson told this story to Michael Mann in the late 1980s. Mann immediately recognized it as the spine of something larger. He spent years building Heat outward from that single documented encounter, and when production began, Adamson consulted throughout, verifying tactical details, confirming emotional beats, ensuring that the diner scene in the film captured the specific quality of what it feels like to sit across from someone who is going to try to destroy you while the coffee is still warm. The restaurant Mann chose for filming, Kate Mantilini in Beverly Hills, was selected specifically because its layout matched the original Chicago location. Same booth geometry, same neutral lighting, the same quality of a space designed for ordinary meals that is now containing something entirely extraordinary. Think about what that means for the scene's authenticity. When Pacino and De Niro sit across from each other in that diner, they are reenacting a real conversation. The geometry is real. The emotional dynamic, two professionals who respect each other precisely because they understand the threat the other represents, is documented. This is not a fictional encounter invented to manufacture drama. It is a reconstruction of something that actually happened. That knowledge changes the scene's weight entirely. Does it change how you see it? 59 minutes apart. The most deliberate delay in cinema history. Here is one of the most audacious structural decisions in the history of crime filmmaking, hiding in plain sight across the entire first act of Heat. Pacino and De Niro do not share the screen until 59 minutes into the film. Look at the poster. Look at the marketing. Two faces, positioned as though they're already in confrontation, as though the film's entire structure is organized around their collision. That's what you're promised. And then Mann spends an entire hour deliberately withholding it. The first act of Heat is constructed as an elaborate series of near misses. Hannah arrives at crime scenes moments after McCauley's crew has cleared the space. He walks through environments the thieves have just vacated, examining the same geography, touching the same surfaces, breathing the same air, but never connecting. Mann shot these sequences using real Los Angeles geography specifically to emphasize this quality of two men circling each other without ever occupying the same frame. This is not an accident of pacing. This is a director who understood that the most powerful confrontation in his film would land with maximum force, only if it had been correctly delayed. Every minute that passes in the first hour without Pacino and De Niro in the same shot is a minute of tension accumulating. By the time they finally sit down together at Kate Mantilini, the audience has been unconsciously primed for nearly an hour to feel the weight of this encounter. Watch the near-miss sequences with this in mind. The bank robbery opening, Hannah arrives as the crew is leaving, examining the precision of what they've left behind. His face as he reconstructs the scene shows a detective who is already forming a picture of the man he hasn't met yet. And McCauley, somewhere out of frame, is presumably doing the same calculation about the detective following his work. Then study how Mann cuts between them once they're finally in the diner together. He refuses to use traditional shot-reverse shot rhythm. Instead, he cuts at irregular intervals, profile shots that capture both men mid-thought, neither given the conventional visual dominance of being centered on screen. The camera refuses to declare a protagonist. It watches both men the way the men are watching each other, with absolute attention and no predetermined conclusion. The delayed confrontation doesn't just make the diner scene feel earned, it makes every subsequent scene between them feel weighted with everything that came before. The audience has spent an hour learning to track these men separately, understanding what each one is capable of, feeling the physics of their parallel lives. By the time they share the frame, the collision feels inevitable in the way that only real inevitability feels. Not manufactured, but unavoidable. How De Niro recruited Pacino, and why it changed everything. Here is a detail about the casting of Heat that most audiences have no idea about, and it fundamentally reframes the chemistry you see on screen. Michael Mann sent the Heat screenplay to Robert De Niro first, in early 1994. De Niro read it overnight. By morning, he had one response. Not notes, not questions, not an agent's negotiating position. He called Al Pacino. De Niro and Pacino had known each other since the 1970s. They had both been in The Godfather Part 2, but their scenes were set in different eras, and they never shared the frame. For over 2 decades, two of the most consequential American actors of their generation had orbited each other without ever truly working together. De Niro read Mann's script and understood immediately that the only person who could play the other half of this equation was the man he'd been in the same industry with for 30 years without ever genuinely collaborating. He sent the script to Pacino with his endorsement already attached, not as a courtesy, as a statement. He was telling Pacino, "This is the one, and I want to do it with you specifically." Mann confirmed in Blu-ray commentary that this changed the entire production's energy from the very beginning. These weren't two stars hired by a studio to stand next to each other and generate chemistry on command. These were two men who had made a choice, who had looked at a piece of material and understood its value, and who had decided, together, privately, before any cameras rolled, that they wanted to do it together. Watch the diner scene now with that knowledge active. Both men lean forward at identical angles. Both use minimal hand gestures, a striking contrast to Pacino's usual physical expressiveness, and an equally striking contrast to De Niro's famous stillness, being slightly, subtly broken. Both speak in cadences that reflect a shared decision to be in this scene, not an actor's technical execution of a director's blocking. The mirroring you see in their body language is not choreographed. It's what happens when two people who have chosen each other walk into a space together and start to talk. The camera catches it because it's genuinely there. This is also why the scene works as well as it does despite being unrehearsed, which brings us to the next detail. The unrehearsed scene. 3 cameras and a gamble. Michael Mann made a decision about the diner scene that most directors in his position would never have risked. No rehearsals. Pacino and De Niro arrived on set the morning of the shoot without having run through the dialogue together, without having worked out the blocking, without having established the rhythm of the scene in advance. Mann had positioned 3 cameras simultaneously around the space, and he let the scene unfold in real time, trusting that what emerged would be more valuable than anything he could have constructed through preparation. Cinematographer Dante Spinotti described Mann's intention clearly. He wanted the danger of not knowing what comes next to be preserved in the performances, not performed danger, actual uncertainty, the genuine experience of 2 people discovering each other in real time, thinking in real time, listening, genuinely listening, because they don't know with certainty what the other is about to say or do. Watch the scene for micro-pauses. They're scattered throughout at irregular intervals, moments where one actor processes something the other has just said, and the pause is fractionally longer than a rehearsed scene would allow. Those pauses are real. They're the space between one thought finishing and another beginning, captured in the actual time it takes for a human mind to respond. Watch the eye contact. Neither man knows exactly when the other will speak, so they're watching each other with the quality of attention that actual conversation requires. the kind you cannot manufacture because the moment you try, the performance moves in front of the experience. Notice also how their rhythms don't quite sync. Pacino's rapid-fire intensity moves at a different speed than De Niro's slow, measured deliberateness. In a rehearsed scene, these rhythms might have been smoothed into a more symmetrical exchange. Unrehearsed, they crash against each other at uneven intervals, and the friction that creates is exactly what makes the scene feel like two genuinely different people in genuine contact, rather than two performers executing a director's vision of two genuinely different people. Mann used approximately 3 or 4 cuts in a 9-minute sequence. The decision to preserve the single take's rhythm meant accepting minor continuity imperfections. A coffee cup's position slightly different between cuts, a hand that has moved in ways the editing can't quite reconcile. These imperfections are visible if you look for them, and they are evidence that what you are watching is documentary footage of something real, rather than constructed drama. The gamble paid off in a way that cannot be overstated. The diner scene between Pacino and De Niro is widely considered one of the greatest scenes in American cinema precisely because it contains something that cannot be manufactured. Two human beings actually present with each other, caught on 3 cameras by a director who had the courage not to control everything. The gunfire that wasn't faked. The downtown shootout's real sound. The downtown Los Angeles shootout in Heat is arguably the most realistic depiction of urban combat ever committed to film. And the reason is something most viewers never think about: the sound. Michael Mann insisted on using blank-firing weapons on location during the sequence. Not sound effects added in post-production, not enhanced audio layered over simulated gunfire. Actual blank-firing weapons on actual downtown Los Angeles streets, generating actual acoustic chaos that the actors were required to navigate in real time. Listen to the shootout with this knowledge and pay attention to what you're actually hearing. The echoes bouncing off glass storefronts are real reflections of blank-fire reports. The way the sound builds and layers as multiple weapons fire simultaneously is real acoustic physics, not a sound designer's approximation of it. The disorientation you feel watching the sequence is the exact disorientation the actors were experiencing while performing it. Watch Val Kilmer's reload sequence specifically. His movements sync perfectly with the actual rhythm of the weapon cycling, because he's responding to mechanical feedback, the physical reality of a weapon in his hands going through its process, rather than hitting marks established during a rehearsal where the weapon was silent. The muscle memory required to execute that reload at that speed under that acoustic pressure is not acting. It is a learned physical skill responding to a real environment. The entire cast trained with live ammunition at a private range before switching to blanks for filming. They learned how the weapons actually operated, how the weight shifts during firing, how the mechanical feedback feels during a reload, how a shooter's body naturally adjusts to recoil. This training is visible in their posture throughout the entire sequence. These aren't actors pretending to navigate a firefight. They're people who have developed genuine competency with the tools they're carrying, executing actual tactical maneuvers under real acoustic pressure in a real location. The result is a sequence that viewers describe as viscerally different from other action films without always being able to articulate why. The why is this: almost everything in the shootout sequence is actually happening, and the human nervous system is extremely good at detecting the difference. SAS training and the Kilmer reload. Military precision on a film set. Taking the firearms training further, because this is a detail that has been confirmed by multiple people connected to the production and deserves its full context. Every member of Heat's principal cast underwent intensive firearms training with Andy McNabb, a former British Special Air Service operator. The 4-week program was not a basic safety orientation or a Hollywood approximation of tactical training. It covered tactical reloads, close-quarters combat, and building-clearing procedures identical to actual law enforcement and military protocols. Val Kilmer invested additional hours beyond the group training perfecting the rapid reload technique visible during the armored car robbery and the downtown shootout. The specific move: magazine dropped, new magazine inserted, round chambered in under 2 seconds. is a documented military skill that requires extensive repetition before it becomes genuinely fluid. Kilmer drilled it until it did. The result is something that has had a documented impact beyond cinema. Military units have reportedly used heat as a training reference for tactical movement and weapon handling. A Hollywood film used by actual military professionals as educational material because the technical execution is accurate enough to be instructive. De Niro's weapon handling during the final airport chase reflects the same level of discipline. Watch the way he moves through that environment, not the dramatic covering and posturing of conventional action movie blocking, but the compact, efficient movement patterns of someone who has been taught how a professional actually navigates hostile space. Every choice is a trained choice, not a cinematic choice. Mann's commitment to tactical realism elevated the entire film's action sequences from entertainment to documentation, and it transformed the actors into something they weren't before the training began. People who understood at a physical level what the characters they were playing were actually doing and why. The location philosophy, 300 rejections and a virgin city. Michael Mann's location scouts did something unusual during pre-production. They deliberately avoided anywhere that had appeared in another film. The logic was specific and architectural. Los Angeles as a filming location had, by 1994, accumulated decades of movie geography. Certain streets, certain buildings, certain neighborhoods had appeared so many times in so many productions that audiences carried unconscious associations with them. Crime film associations, cop drama associations, thriller associations built up across decades of watching. Mann wanted to use Los Angeles in a way that felt simultaneously recognizable and genuinely new. The team scouted over 300 locations and rejected any space that had been featured in a major production during the previous decade. Macaulay's cliffside apartment in Malibu had never been filmed before Heat. The minimalist aesthetic of the space, glass walls, clean lines, no decorative accumulation, a man's home that looks exactly like what a professional criminal who has committed to impermanence would actually live in, was an unfilmed space. The camera could show it without any Hollywood history attached to it. The industrial corridors where Waingro appears were chosen because they didn't evoke crime film iconography. Watch those sequences. The spaces feel slightly wrong in a way that's hard to identify. They don't look like the crime movie spaces you've been trained by other films to expect. That's intentional. Mann described wanting Los Angeles to feel like a city that his camera was discovering rather than revisiting, and the constraint he placed on his location scouts forced exactly that. Every location in Heat exists in a kind of cinematic virginity. It hasn't accumulated other films' meanings, so it can hold only the meanings Mann gives it. This forces actors to discover their environments genuinely. They can't fall back on the muscle memory of having been in this kind of space in a previous film. The space is new. Their responses are new. The authenticity visible in how the cast inhabits Heat's geography comes partly from the fact that the geography itself was new to cinema. Deep preparation. How Pacino and De Niro became real people. The immersion research both Pacino and De Niro undertook for Heat has been discussed in fragments across various interviews, but the full picture of what they actually did during preparation is rarely presented completely. Pacino shadowed LAPD homicide detectives during pre-production, not for a day or a weekend, for months. He attended actual crime scenes. He observed real interrogation sessions. He watched working detectives navigate the specific professional culture that Heat was depicting, absorbing not just the procedural mechanics, but the emotional texture of a career built on arriving after violence has already occurred. Technical advisor Tom Elfman, a retired LAPD detective, confirmed that Pacino absorbed procedural details that never appear in dialogue, but saturate his physical choices throughout the entire film. The way Hannah invades personal space during interrogations, the deliberate violation of distance as a tactical tool, came directly from observing how actual detectives work. The rapid oscillation between aggression and false camaraderie during questioning scenes is a documented real-world technique that Pacino watched being applied before he applied it himself. De Niro's preparation went in the opposite direction. He met with former criminals and studied their body language and philosophical frameworks, not the surface performance of criminality, but the internal architecture, how someone who has chosen a life in opposition to conventional society thinks about that choice, how they carry themselves in space, how they manage information and relationships and risk. Macaulay's careful, measured speech patterns, the way he reveals nothing unintentionally, the way every sentence is pre-edited before it leaves his mouth, reflect what De Niro found when he actually sat with people who had spent years in professional criminal culture. You learn to control information as survival skill. It starts as conscious effort and becomes character. Watch how Hannah constantly invades personal space while Macaulay maintains careful distance even from his own crew. These are not character choices invented by actors. They are spatial behaviors observed in actual professionals and translated into performance. The film's realism at the behavioral level comes from this: two actors who did the work of becoming the people before they arrived on set to play them. From TV movie to masterpiece, the 6-year evolution. Here's something that surprises most Heat fans when they discover it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Robert De Niro.
The film, you know, began as a made-for-television movie. In 1989, Michael Mann directed L.A. Takedown for NBC. It ran 97 minutes, featured different actors in the same basic story structure, and told essentially the same plot with the same fundamental dynamic. A detective and a thief on a collision course, a coffee meeting, a moral reckoning. The TV version was competent. It told its story efficiently within the constraints of its format. But Mann knew it wasn't finished. He spent 6 years revising and expanding the concept, transforming what was a tight procedural into something that ultimately runs nearly 3 hours. The transformation wasn't just about adding length, it was about changing what the story was fundamentally about. The TV version treats the Macaulay-Hannah relationship as plot mechanism. Two men in opposition who will inevitably meet in violence. The theatrical film explores it as philosophical inquiry. Two men who have organized their entire lives around the same singular obsession. Macaulay around professional execution, Hannah around professional pursuit, and who discover in their brief genuine contact that they are more alike than different, and that this similarity changes nothing about what they have to do to each other. Mann has said that the television experience taught him which elements needed expansion, particularly the domestic lives of both men, the relationships that give each of them vulnerable pressure points that their professional selves would prefer not to have. Hannah's failing marriages, Macaulay's almost love with Edie. These are the threads that the TV version handled as backstory, and the theatrical version explores as equal in weight to the crime narrative itself. The 6 years of development also changed the pacing philosophy entirely. Heat lingers on quiet moments. A man sitting alone in a sparse apartment, a couple talking before everything changes. That would have been impossible in a TV format's compressed runtime. Mann learned the value of these silences precisely because the TV version didn't have room for them and suffered for it. The evolution is the story of a filmmaker realizing that the material he had was bigger than the container he'd been given, and spending 6 years building a container worthy of it. The neutral room. Production design as psychological weapon. Neil Speacock, Heat's production designer, revealed something about the location selection for the diner scene that most audiences would never think to wonder about. Mann rejected 15 other restaurants before choosing Kate Mantilini, and the reason he rejected them is as revealing as the reason he chose the final location. Every rejected restaurant had too much personality. Think about what that means. Mann was looking for a space specifically designed to contain 2 actors without adding meaning of its own. A dramatically lit restaurant creates mood. A restaurant with distinctive decor adds connotation. A beautiful space competes with its occupants for the viewer's attention. Mann needed a space that would offer the 2 most compelling faces in American cinema, literally nothing to compete with. Kate Mantilini's beige walls, simple booth design, and flat lighting are not accidental aesthetic choices. They are the deliberate construction of a psychological container, a neutral environment whose function is to focus all available attention on the 2 people inside it. Watch the background during the diner scene. There are no dramatic shadows, no interesting architectural details, no eye-catching art. The extras are present but managed at a visual distance that keeps them out of focus and out of the frame's emotional center. Just two men in a generic American diner, with nothing around them that asks to be looked at except each other. The camera never pulls back wide during the scene. Mann keeps the framing close, maintains the intimacy of the neutral space, refuses to give the viewer the visual release of a wide shot that would recontextualize the scene within the larger environment. You are trapped with these two men in this contained space for 9 minutes, with nowhere to look except at them. The neutral room is a cinematic instrument, and it works so completely that most viewers never notice it's there, which is exactly how it's supposed to work. Keanu Reeves said no, and Val Kilmer changed the film. Val Kilmer wasn't Michael Mann's first choice for the role of Chris Shiherlis. Keanu Reeves was. Mann met with Reeves in early 1994 and offered him the part. Reeves passed due to scheduling conflicts, and the role went to Kilmer. But the casting change didn't just fill a slot. It fundamentally changed what Shiherlis became within the film's ensemble. Think about what a Keanu Reeves version of this character would have been. In 1994, Reeves was fresh from Speed, a performer whose physical presence and particular quality of expressive openness made him compelling in action contexts, but gave his characters a visible anxiety, a sense of someone feeling the weight of the situation they're in. That Shiherlis would have been more externally reactive, more visibly under pressure, a member of Macaulay's crew who showed the seams. Val Kilmer brought something entirely different, controlled, cold, almost robotically professional in his execution of the character's function within the group. Watch Kilmer during the bank robbery. His face shows zero emotional response to the chaos unfolding around him, while the rest of the crew manages the psychology of the situation, the adrenaline, the risk calculation, the presence of armed guards and terrified civilians. Shiherlis is running technical procedures, pure execution. Kilmer described seeing Shiherlis as a craftsman rather than a thrill-seeker, a man who does this because he's extraordinarily good at it, and who has separated his professional identity so completely from the circumstances he operates in that the circumstances no longer register as emotionally significant. He's not brave. Bravery implies overcoming fear. He's past that point entirely. This makes Shiherlis the most disciplined member of Macaulay's crew, and in a certain sense, the most chilling. Tom Sizemore's volatile character provides the crew's unpredictability. De Niro's Macaulay provides its leadership. Kilmer's Shiherlis provides its technical floor, the person who will always do exactly what needs to be done, regardless of what's happening around him. Reeves would have made the character human in a different way. Kilmer made him precise. And precision, in a film about people who have made obsession into a professional art form, is its own kind of devastating characterization. The full picture, what the hidden details add up to. Step back from each individual detail and ask what they add up to collectively, because the answer to that question is the real secret of Heat. Michael Mann made a film where the most important information is hidden in the performance, not the plot, where the backstory that explains everything is never spoken because the actors are too busy inhabiting it to announce it, where the locations were chosen specifically to avoid triggering associations from other films, so that what you see is genuinely new, where the most celebrated scene was filmed without rehearsal, because rehearsal would have replaced genuine discovery with the performance of discovery, where the weapons are real, and the sound is real, and the tactical movements are real, because reality, in this film's value system, is the only thing worth capturing. What Mann built was a film that requires a certain quality of attention to actually receive. Passive watching produces a very good crime thriller with extraordinary performances. Active watching, looking at the hands, tracking the body language, thinking about the space, noticing what is and isn't said, produces something closer to a psychological study of obsession and parallel identity. The Adamson-Macaulay coffee meeting is real. The Powder backstory is real. The 6 years of development represent a filmmaker who refused to release the material until he understood it completely. The casting came from De Niro making a phone call rather than a studio making a calculation. The diner scene is largely one take because Mann recognized that what was happening in real time was better than anything constructed editing could produce. Every single one of these choices points in the same direction, toward a film that is trying to capture something true about the people it depicts and the world they inhabit, and that is willing to sacrifice cinematic convenience to do it. Heat is a film about two men who have made the same fundamental choice, to organize their entire lives around a single obsessive purpose, and who recognize each other across a moral divide precisely because of that similarity. The film was made the same way. Mann organized his entire production around the single obsessive purpose of capturing something true. And the result is a film that reveals more of itself the more carefully you look. There's a reason Heat has been in constant conversation for 30 years. Not because it's a great crime film, there are other great crime films, but because it operates on a level that most films don't attempt and even fewer achieve. It hides its most important information in the places viewers aren't trained to look. It trusts its audience to eventually find their way there. Now that you know where to look, the hands, the pauses, the geography, the tiny continuity breaks in the diner scene, the body language of actors who actually trained for what they're performing, the film is different, not because it changed, but because you have. The question is, which detail hit you hardest? Was it learning that Pacino was playing an addiction that was written out of the script, but never out of the character? Was it the knowledge that the diner scene's electricity comes from two men who genuinely didn't know what the other was about to say? Was it the real coffee meeting in a real Chicago diner between a real detective and a real criminal, preserved in the geometry of a Beverly Hills restaurant Mann chose because it matched the original geography? Tell us in the comments, and tell us what film you want us to open up next, because if Heat has taught us anything, it's that the most interesting stories are always hiding just beneath the surface of what you think you already know. Like, subscribe and hit the notification bell. There's more to see.